There's a sharp contrast. And it's in that passage, remember, that Paul says, however, we do speak a wisdom amongst the mature. And he says, if the rulers of this age knew this, they would have never crucified the Lord of glory. And we mentioned, just passing, remember, that rulers of the age, it's not real sure there whether Paul is referring to Caesar, Pilate, and so forth, or whether he's referring there to the demonic henchmen. You know, the sort of same thing that we receive in Ephesians 2. You have this gospel in contradistinction to the manipulative force of human rhetoric, which the Greeks made a lot out of and which are based on to a certain extent. So there's that passage there in 1 Corinthians 1 to 3, which is an important passage to look at. Then another passage, a terribly important passage, is the Colossians chapter 2 passage. Now, in the first half of the passage, it talks about letting no one deceive you with empty deceit, human philosophy, and so forth, in chapter 2, verse 8 following. And talks about the elementary principles, or the elementary, rudimentary elements of the world and such. And there you have this whole business of these rudimentary elements, these perhaps either the basic principles on which the world exists and moves, or demonic rulers being bound up with this whole business of philosophy, human philosophy, vain philosophy, as it stands over against the gospel. That's the first half of Colossians. But the latter half of Colossians, after it gives that glorious text that he disarmed the authorities and powers, it moves on then to talk about letting no one judge you, therefore. And we've said it before, and you've probably heard 1,000 times, when you see the word therefore, always look to see what it's there for. Verse 16, therefore do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. And then notice, if you died with Christ in verse 20 to the basic principles of this world, why, as though you still belong to it, do you submit to its rules? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These are all destined to perish with the use, because they are based on human commands and teachings, etc. There, this whole business of the way of the world, this demonic sort of force, or put it this way, a direct conclusion that Paul draws from the fact that Christ disarmed demonic powers on the cross is that we should not let anyone judge us. As though the demonic and judging are so sort of closely bound up together, indeed they are bound up together, so that to submit again to this is indeed to forfeit the liberty, the freedom that Christ has won for us. So that's the epistle to the Colossians there. Now, they're just a couple of passages that are important to understand. I'll be mentioning some other passages when we come to them in the course of the lecture. Now, what do we want to talk about tonight? Well, I want to title my address tonight, The Gospel and Mental Health. The Gospel and Mental Health. In the context of Christian freedom and Christian liberty, in the context of the subjective freedom that Christ has won for us and grants to us as a gift. Those of you who know anything at all about psychology and mental health and religion will know that there's quite a debate that rages in scholarly circles and semi-scholarly circles concerning the relationship between religion and mental health, or religion and the self-image that a person has of him or herself in particular. There are some people, for instance, who advocate that there is a direct cause and effect relationship between the religion that a person has and the particular self-estimate that that person has of him or herself. There are others, on the other hand, who will caution against too quick a cause and effect relationship being placed between religion and mental health. Because it is said that it's not only a person's religion that determines the estimation that that person has of him or herself, but there are sort of factors which are already present, for example, before religion becomes any sort of a determinative reality of force in that person's life. And it's not only religion, but it's also the socio-cultural milieu in which the person is living. And there's quite a debate that rages in this particular area. What is the relationship between a man's religion and his self-estimation? I come from the Reformed tradition. I stand in the classic Reformed Calvinist tradition since the Reformation. Now that doesn't mean I dot every I and cross every T of John Calvin, though it probably means I do every second I and every second T, something like that. But I mention this only because Reformed religion or Calvinistic religion has been particularly susceptible to great ridicule and criticism right in this very area in the past, and indeed still in the present. In other words, it has been said that the Reformed religion, the Calvinistic religion, is an austere religion. And people have pointed to some writings in John Calvin, and before him, of course, to St. Augustine, to show that there have been very, very damaging sort of statements concerning the nature of man. You remember, for instance, that St. Augustine said that man was a massa perditionis, a mass of perdition. And some statements also from Calvin could lead us to think that there is some strength in this particular approach to Calvinistic religion. Let me read you a few samples from Calvin's writings. There is more worth in all the vermin of the world than there is in man, for he is a creature in whom the image of God has been defaced. There is more worth in all the vermin of the world than there is in man, says Calvin. Now that sort of statement has been taken up and used to show that Calvinistic religion, the religion of John Calvin himself, lends to the world a very poor, pessimistic self-estimation of man. And that this religion has been criticized for bringing about a bad state of mental health in its adherents. Let me give you some more of Calvin. Men can produce nothing of themselves but what is filthy and abominable. In the whole of our nature there remains not a speck of uprightness. To whatever part of man we turn our eyes, it is impossible to see anything that is not impure, profane, and abominable to God. Unless we think that Calvin doesn't have us in mind, let us remember that he said, even the most perfect find nothing in their own nature but wretchedness. Now you see, these type of statements have been taken up, and it has been suggested that Calvin's religion and Calvinistic religion in general has given to the world an extremely pessimistic, man-hating, destructive self-image to the adherents of this particular branch of religion. You remember last night that I spoke about the effects of evangelical holiness religion on so many of its adherents that I experienced firsthand when I was president of a seminary. And I mentioned on some occasions we even had to have certain people certified because of the effects of this religion upon them. And I might say in 10 years of fairly close association with evangelical religion, I might say that I am terribly alarmed at the self-image and the state of mental health or lack thereof that is exhibited in so many adherents of this particular type of religion. So the question comes round, you see, if what we have said about the gospel and the Spirit is correct, or if what we have said about the Spirit taking the gospel and applying that to all areas of Christian existence and so forth is correct, what are we to say concerning the gospel and mental health? And what I want to simply do is this. I want to list off 5 or so characteristics of the religion that promotes mental health. And I want to say how the gospel responds in these types of situations. And then I want to say something about Calvinistic religion down to the present time in relation to mental health. So the gospel and mental health is the subject before us.